I always imagined my wedding night would feel like a sunrise, soft, golden, full of promise. Instead, I stood in the dim hallway of the house Adrian and I had moved into just weeks before the ceremony, the scent of new paint still clinging faintly to the air. My gown clung to my skin like memory foam, damp from a long day of dancing and hugging relatives. My feet throbbed. My makeup had surrendered hours ago. He handed me a key, silver, cold, and simply said, "Guest room's all set. For you? I need to crash. Long day." Then he disappeared. No kiss, no lingering glance, just the creak of the master bedroom door closing behind him. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the key like it was a foreign object. A prank. Or a mistake. But no. It had a label. Guest room, etched into a cheap little tag. Deliberate. Clear. Still, I told myself he was just tired. The day had been overwhelming. People, vows, logistics. He'd barely eaten. Maybe he needed time to process. Maybe he was shy about intimacy. I'd waited this long. I could wait one more night. I changed out of my dress alone. I hung it carefully, like it might disintegrate if I breathed too hard near it. Then I lay down on the stiff guest bed, still sticky from sweat and hairspray, mascara leaving shadows on Adrian's pristine pillowcases. The house creaked. My heart ached. I curled into myself, swallowing confusion and shame, and told myself fairy tales about tomorrow. But tomorrow didn't bring answers. Or warmth. He made coffee, read emails, took calls. When I asked if we were still doing our planned honeymoon in Santa Barbara, he looked surprised, as if I'd reminded him of a dentist appointment he forgot to cancel. "We'll talk later," he said, eyes already on his screen. Later stretched into days, then weeks. The guest room became my space, my cage, my purgatory. I stopped asking questions. I watered the plants. I made dinner. I organized my closet by color and season, because order made the silence feel manageable. We became housemates who exchanged calendar invites, and I, bride, wife, ghost, became an afterthought with good credit. I told no one. When my mother called, I told her Adrian was focused on work. When my best friend Rachel sent heart emojis and Mrs. Walker texts, I replied with pictures of our new espresso machine. I still wore my ring. I still posted filtered snapshots of flower arrangements and latte art, but I was shrinking. And then, one rainy Thursday, I went looking for my yoga mat under the master bed. It was there, barely tucked, barely hidden, a thin gold bracelet. Not mine. It was delicate, elegant. I knew jewelry. This wasn't the kind of thing you misplace. It was the kind you gave with intention. There was an engraving on the inside. A. Yours, M. My throat closed around a breath I couldn't swallow. The rain tapped against the window like a ticking clock. I sat back on my heels, bracelet in my palm, the cold imprint biting into my skin. I could hear Adrian downstairs on a call, his voice calm and professional, talking budgets or clients or God knows what. I stared at the bracelet like it was a riddle, or a key, or a confession. Suddenly, everything made a kind of backward sense. The guest room, the absence, the silences, the way he touched me like I was furniture, the way he looked at his phone more than my face. I walked back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed I had slept in that first night in my wedding dress. The bracelet in one hand, the guest room key in the other. Neither belonged to me, and yet both were mine to carry. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat in the stillness, finally hearing what the house had been trying to tell me. What exactly did I marry into? That was the moment the real wedding began. The one between me and the truth. Looking back, I realized it wasn't love at first sight. It was need. A longing to be seen, to be desired, to be told I was more than what my ex had reduced me to. An afterthought with good taste in music. It was at a gallery opening on a chilly November night, the kind where the city feels like a cigarette between two fingers, smoldering, sophisticated, dangerous. I was there to photograph the event for a local blog. Adrian was there to buy a painting he didn't even glance at twice. He wore a navy suit so sharp it looked like it could cut through glass, and cufflinks shaped like chess pieces. His voice was smooth, like dark liquor with too much charm and not enough warmth. He called my photos soulful, said I had a haunting eye for stillness. No one had spoken about my work that way before. Most people just commented on the lighting or asked what camera I used. But Adrian looked at me like I was art. He asked me to dinner that night. I said yes, without hesitation. I wanted to be swept, off my feet, and he, God help me, knew how to sweep. Dinner turned into weekends, weekends into months. He invited me to events where I stood beside him like an accessory, always told to wear something understated but elegant. I complied, happy to be chosen. He introduced me as a real artist to CEOs and brand consultants, then later teased me in the car for not knowing which wine glass to use first. "You're raw," he said once, caressing my cheek. Like marble before it's carved. I thought it was a compliment. The first red flag came early, but I filed it away like lint in a coat pocket. We were at a restaurant, one of those places where the plates are the size of saucers and everything costs more than it tastes. The waiter brought Adrian the wrong whiskey, just 1 year off. Adrian didn't just send it back. He dismissed the man with a cold, clipped voice that felt like frostbite. "Do you have any idea what you're serving? Or do they let amateurs walk in off the street now?" I laughed nervously, tried to lighten the mood. "It's just a drink, babe." He smiled at me, but it was tight, calculated. Details matter. People who ignore details end up irrelevant. I didn't argue. I told myself he was just particular, ambitious, driven. The second red flag was more subtle. He never talked about his past. Anytime I asked about his childhood, his parents, his exes, anything that came before, I got the same answer. Too messy. Let's just focus on now. I should have seen it. Anyone who keeps their history locked up that tightly usually has something rotting behind the door. But I was already falling, or floating, or something in between. When he proposed on the balcony of a penthouse hotel suite, candlelight flickering, the city glittering below like a spilled jewelry box, I said yes. Of course I did. He had a ring, a speech, a photographer hidden in the shadows to catch the moment. My sister Leah pulled me aside the next day. Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for a crack in my reflection. "Are you sure?" She whispered. "He seems off, controlling, like he's always performing." I laughed it off. He just doesn't let people in easily. But I see the real him. What I didn't say was that I needed him to be real. I had already given so much of myself to the idea of us. I left my studio apartment, gave up my downtown gallery dreams, and moved cities to be with him. I told myself it was a fresh start, a bigger canvas, but really, I was erasing myself to make room for his life. Photography became a hobby, then a memory. My cameras gathered dust in drawers I no longer opened. He bought me a Chanel perfume I'd never wear on my own. Too powdery, too loud. "It suits you now," he said. I wore it anyway. I stopped dyeing my hair red because he preferred natural shades. I stopped listening to my old playlists in the house because he found them too melancholic. I became the kind of woman who smiled at dinner parties and drank wine without speaking too much. Who knew how to stand beside a man like Adrian without casting a shadow? Some nights, lying alone in the guest room before I even knew why I was being kept there, I'd close my eyes and try to remember the girl who used to wake up before sunrise, to catch golden hour light in forgotten alleys. She felt like someone I once loved, someone I buried in pearls and compromises. The guest room wasn't the beginning of the betrayal. It was just the crack in the mirror. The moment the reflection warped enough for me to finally see the truth. Adrian hadn't fallen in love with me. He'd fallen in love with the idea of someone who wouldn't challenge him. A silent partner. A trophy. A muse he could sculpt into. Silence. And I had said yes to him while slowly, softly saying no to myself. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter. The risotto simmered gently, clinging to the pan the way I once clung to hope. I stirred it carefully, just like the recipe had said. Patiently, slowly, ladling in warm broth as if feeding something. Fragile. It was our first wedding anniversary. I wore the same silk dress from our engagement dinner, the one Adrian had said made me look expensive, but approachable. I even spritzed the perfume he'd picked out that spring, the powdery one he said made me smell like a memory. That line used to make me smile. Now it clung to me like mildew. By 7, the risotto was perfect. I lit candles, turned on a jazz record he'd once claimed to love. I imagined him walking in, loosening his tie, surprised by the effort, maybe even touched. By 8, I texted him. Me. Happy anniversary, love. Everything's ready. Are you close? No reply. At 8:30, I called. Straight to voicemail. I refreshed the location sharing app we'd enabled months ago. Originally for safety, he said. He'd turned his off. By 9, the wine tasted like regret. The food sat, cold. The candles flickered in still air. Little dancers performing for an audience of 1. At 10, I sat in silence, the jazz record looping, the smell of cooling cream and garlic beginning to turn sour. I stared at the empty seat across from me and felt like I was watching a ghost eat with her hands folded in her lap. By midnight, I blew out the candles. The silence that followed wasn't new. But tonight, it was deafening. I didn't cry. Not yet. My grief hadn't reached my throat. It sat in my stomach like uncooked rice, hard, sharp, expanding with every moment I stayed. At 2:16 a.m., the front door clicked open. I didn't move. I sat in the dark. His footsteps were lazy, confident. I smelled her before I saw him. Floral, sweet, syrupy perfume that did not belong in our home. He entered the hallway, flicked on a light, and blinked when he saw me sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the extinguished candles. "Oh," he said flatly. "Didn't think you'd be up." I waited. He looked at the table, the long cooled plates, and shrugged. "I had dinner with a client. It ran late." He said it like he'd missed the bus, not a milestone. I studied his shirt. A faint smear of lipstick bloomed near the collar, like a wound. Which client wears Chanel No. 5 and leaves lipstick like that? His eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." And just like that, he walked past me, past the table I had set, past the love I had tried, so desperately, to resuscitate. The door to the master bedroom clicked shut. That sound, that click, split something inside me. Later that afternoon, when he'd left again, I walked into his office. The door was always closed. His desk, always locked, but he'd grown careless. Or maybe he didn't believe I'd ever grow bold. I found the key in his coat pocket. My hands shook as I slid it into the drawer. It resisted at first, as if guarding its secrets. Then it clicked open. Inside were receipts, neatly stacked, cataloged like trophies. Hotel rooms, couples' spa treatments, restaurants I'd never been invited to. One receipt, dated 2 weeks ago, was for a boutique in the city that sold only lingerie. Beneath the stack was a letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "My heart," it began. "Last night was everything. I didn't think it could feel this electric again. You make me want to leave everything else behind. You're not a secret. I swear you're not. Soon, this will all be yours. Just be patient a little longer." It was signed simply. M.I. dropped the letter. It floated down like a feather and landed face up on the hardwood. I couldn't breathe. The room swayed. My pulse roared in my ears. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I stumbled backward, hand over my mouth, a sob curling its claws inside. Me. I ran to the guest room. My room now. The room where I slept while my husband made love to someone else in the bed we once picked out together. I curled into the corner of the bed, wedding photo in hand. My dress in the photo was white, delicate, embroidered with lace leaves. I remembered how the veil tickled my shoulders, how the florist had told me, "You look like someone beginning forever." But the woman in the photo, her smile, her eyes, was a stranger, a fool. I pressed the frame to my chest, not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to remember how heavy lies can be. I lay there for hours, watching shadows move across the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything I had ignored for so long. The perfume on his collar, the way he never said we, only I. The slow erasure of myself. I had thought love meant compromise. That if I stayed long enough, small enough, quiet enough, he'd return to the man he pretended to be. But Adrian never lost that man. That man never existed. And that night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry. Instead, I stared into the darkness and whispered the words like a prayer. I am not staying. I didn't leave the next day, or the day after. I needed to be sure. To wait until the part of me that still loved him, still hoped, was quiet enough to walk away. 3 days later, Adrian left for a conference in Chicago. I watched him wheel his sleek black suitcase down the hallway without a glance back. His scent, woodsy cologne and deceit, lingered in the air like the final note of a song I no longer liked. The door closed behind him. And for the first time, in what felt like years, I inhaled fully. Then I moved. I packed without sound. No slamming drawers, no tearing photos, no dramatic sobbing into sweaters that once smelled like him. Just silence. Purpose, a single suitcase. Not because I didn't have more, but because I wanted less. I folded my oldest jeans, a soft gray sweater with a coffee stain from my favorite cafe back home. My grandmother's locket, the one she wore through war and widowhood, went around my neck. And my camera. The old Canon, worn but familiar, found its place on top of everything like a promise I'd once made to myself. I paused at the vanity. My wedding ring gleamed in the dish beside, my perfume bottle, both gifts from Adrian. I picked up the ring, felt its cold circle press against my palm. Then I closed my fingers around it and left it behind. The perfume, too. I didn't want to smell like a memory anymore. I left a note on the marble kitchen counter, written in clean, unsentimental cursive. "Don't call, you won't find me." Then I walked out the front door with nothing but my breath in my chest and the keys to a rented car. I didn't cry until I saw the highway stretch out ahead of me, not out of regret, but relief. My hands gripped the steering wheel the way a woman grips her future, cautiously but firmly. 3 towns away, nestled between a bakery and a bookstore, I found a room for rent above a flower shop. The landlord was a woman named Rose, silver-haired, warm, with a mouth that always looked like it was trying not to laugh. "No parties," she'd warned gently, "but you can have as many plants as you want." The walls were pale lavender. The windows faced east. Each morning, the scent of lilies and fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards, and I began to return to myself, slowly, quietly. The first week, I slept more than I had in months. My body needed rest, but more than that, it needed not to. Be watched, judged, ignored. I drank tea by the window and journaled in long, crooked lines. I wrote about my wedding night, about the guest room key, about Melissa, but mostly I wrote about the girl I used to be. The one who danced barefoot in her first apartment, took self-portraits in bathtubs, and stayed up late editing photos she loved. I got a job photographing weekend markets, small town, weddings, and newborn shoots. I didn't tell anyone where I came from, only that I had come here to start again. Every Thursday, Rose brought me tea, always in the same chipped mug with violets on the rim. One rainy morning, as we sipped under the awning, she said gently, "Grief isn't just for the dead, you know." Blinked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled, then looked out at the gray sky. "We grieve the lives we thought we'd live, the people we pretended to be. It's still a loss, even if no one died." That night, I dreamt of my old self. Not the broken version who curled up in the guest bed, but the wild, vibrant girl who once believed in possibility. She was barefoot in a field, her camera around her neck, hair tangled in wind. She didn't say anything to me. She just looked alive. Weeks passed. I stopped checking Adrian's social media. I started wearing color again. Soft greens, rust, reds, sky blue. The palette of freedom. One morning, as I walked past the full-length mirror near the flower shop staircase, I caught sight of myself and paused. I really looked. My face was the same, but different. The sadness hadn't vanished, but it no longer lived at the surface. My eyes were quieter, wiser. My lips looked less strained, my shoulders straighter. I ran my fingers over the camera strap across my chest. It felt like an old friend, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't flinch at my own reflection. I didn't just look like someone surviving. I looked like someone becoming. There's a kind of power in choosing silence. Not the kind I lived with before. Tight-lipped, fearful silence. But the kind born from stillness, intention, observation. I began saying yes again. Not to him or anyone who reminded me of him, but to the world. To the version of me who had once stood in art school galleries and whispered dreams under skylights. Work came slowly, then all at once. Small shoots became bigger ones. I photographed real moments. Fathers twirling daughters under string lights. Brides gripping their grandmother's hand before walking down the aisle. A woman scattering her wife's ashes into the ocean. Grief. Joy. Quiet love. People started calling it honest work. They said I had an eye for what mattered. Maybe that was true. Maybe pain refines you like that. Burns away the gloss, leaves only what's real. It was during a gala at the Whitmore Foundation, a charity event for inner-city arts, that I saw them. Adrian, Melissa. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, the one I had once helped him pick out for a New York conference. She wore red, brazen, silky, the color of lipstick stains on shirt collars and late-night apologies. His hand rested on the small of her back like it belonged there. Her lips brushed his ear. And on her wrist was the bracelet I'd once unwrapped on our second anniversary. Sapphire and gold. I didn't move. I didn't gasp or cry or flee. Instead, I lifted my camera. Click. It wasn't for revenge. It wasn't to expose them. It was for me. To remember what clarity looked like. I walked away before they noticed me. I don't even think my pulse sped up. That night, I uploaded the photo, then archived it. A silent stone laid in the grave of our story. That was the moment I stopped mourning him entirely and started gathering what I needed. The first step was access. Adrian had never been careful with his technology. The shared cloud we used for syncing calendars and files, he never removed me from it. I could still see his receipts, calendar appointments, some of his texts. Like always, he'd assumed I'd never look too closely. I looked. I followed the trail backward. Spa weekends at a resort in Aspen he claimed was for client entertaining. Flights that didn't line up with his lies. Dozens of payments to a boutique jewelry store I'd never stepped foot in. Each piece clicked into place like a lock turning. Next came the finances. He had multiple accounts, but he made the mistake of routing several through the same financial manager we'd used when we got married. A man who, surprisingly, still liked me. "I'm not supposed to do this," he said when we met at a diner halfway between our cities. "But I always thought you deserved better." He handed me a manila folder, thick with printouts. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, wire transfers with coded names, and tucked into the back, divorce insurance paperwork, signed 3 months before. He proposed. I didn't cry. I scanned, highlighted, noted, cataloged. I found a lawyer through Rose's sister. Her name was Dana. She wore boots with steel toes and spoke with a calm, deliberate cadence. She asked me to tell her everything, so I did. When I finished, she nodded, handed me tissues I didn't need, and said, "You're not the first. You won't be the last, but I promise we'll make you whole." We filed for divorce quietly, strategic, clean, no dramatic texts. No warning. The paperwork included fraud, hidden income, and emotional abuse. I had proof of everything. While Dana handled the legal choreography, I began to handle the internal one. I deleted every photo of us together. I stopped saying his name out loud. I reconnected with my sister. I told her I was sorry for disappearing, for defending him, for pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. "I hated him," she said softly. "But I never stopped loving you. Sometimes we don't know how lost we are until someone uses our name with softness again." I started wearing my grandmother's locket every day. Inside was a photo of her on her wedding day. Eyes wide, dress borrowed, hope stitched into every seam. She'd outlived 2 husbands and still laughed like joy was a birthright. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be the kind of woman who knew what she'd lost and still chose to love the world anyway. The court date came 6 weeks later. It was raining. Of course it was. I wore a navy dress, no makeup, and my grandmother's locket. Adrian didn't look at me once. He came with a high-priced lawyer and a face carved from stone. Melissa wasn't there. Maybe she was at a spa. It was quick. Dana was masterful, calm, precise. The judge reviewed the files, the evidence, the trail of deception. Adrian barely spoke. When the gavel came down, it sounded like thunder inside me. Afterward, I walked out into the rain with the papers folded in my coat pocket, my heels echoing, on the courthouse steps. I stood there for a moment. Let it soak in. Then I whispered, not to him, not to the clouds, but to myself. I'm coming for my last word. The idea came quietly, not in a rush of anger or a storm of tears. Just a soft thought on a Thursday morning, while drinking tea from the chipped porcelain cup Rose had given me, the one with violets along the rim. I stared at the steam curling, upward, and thought, what would it look like if I ended this my way? Not for vengeance, not to match his cruelty, but to reclaim my story. I found the perfect venue. Modern, minimalist, plenty of glass. I booked it under Adrian's company name, using the shared corporate card I still had access to. An executive appreciation event. The description was vague, celebratory. Exactly the kind of thing his ego couldn't resist. The guest list was strategic. Investors, long-term clients. His parents, former colleagues, and Melissa. I didn't send the invites from me, just from the company, formal, polished, anonymous. Then I built the presentation, each slide carefully chosen, not lurid, not angry, just honest. A wedding photo. Me, smiling at him with my veil slightly crooked, the one he used to keep on his desk. A shot of the guest room, bed untouched, my camera on the floor, a close-up of the bracelet on Melissa's wrist from the gala. Screenshots of receipts, texts, calendar entries, no captions, just images, let them speak. On the day of the event, I wore white. Not bridal white, bone-white silk trousers, a soft blouse, and the perfume he once said made me smell like a memory. I hadn't worn it since that anniversary night. This time, it was for me. The venue filled slowly, murmurs, glasses clinking. Adrian arrived fashionably late, of course, his trademark. He strolled in like a prince surveying his kingdom, Melissa, clinging to his arm. He didn't notice me right away. When he did, his brow furrowed, confused, then amused. "Didn't expect to see you here," he murmured, brushing past me. "I know," I replied. At exactly 7:15 p.m., the lights dimmed. I stepped onto the stage. I could feel the hush settle in like fog. Dozens of faces turning. Some I knew. Most I didn't. I took the microphone. My hands were steady. "Thank you for coming," I began. "Tonight isn't about business. It's about truth." The first photo appeared behind me. Our wedding. The room was silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told the story. Not all of it. Just the shape of it. I told them how he made promises, how he built a life with smoke and mirrors. I showed them the receipts, the calendar overlaps, the names that didn't match, the hotel bills, the bracelet. At one point, someone gasped. Adrian stood frozen, hands clenched, jaw twitching. Melissa's face blanched. Then she turned and walked, out, heels echoing across marble. I didn't flinch. And then, the final slide. A photo I had taken of myself. In the guest room. Standing in my wedding dress. Still zipped, still pure. Holding the small silver key. "My guest room," I said. "Where I spent nights wondering what I'd done wrong. Where I begged silence to mean safety." A pause. This was my prison. I made it my proof. And then I stepped down. No applause. Just silence. Awed. Uneasy. Reverent. Adrian tried to speak. I didn't stay to hear what came out. I walked through the same doors I had entered with, spine straight, perfume, lingering behind me. That night, I unlocked a new door. My studio. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Light wood floors, tall windows, a single fern by the desk. The scent of lilies still clung to my sweater from the flower shop below. I stood in the middle of the room and took a breath. Then I hung the guest room key on a tiny brass hook above my desk. The locket around my neck caught the soft light and glinted like a wink from the past. Not a wound. A reminder. Not of what broke me, but of what I walked through. What I chose. I am not a guest in my story anymore. I own every room now,